Hi, welcome to the Daiku Podcast. I'm Gary Snow. Today I welcome Stu Horvath, the author of Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, which chronicles how RPGs have evolved since their inception. Stu is also the co-host of the Vintage RPG podcast along with John Hambo McGuire, and also the publisher of the Unwinnable Web Site and Patreon, which has a monthly newsletter that features analysis and the critique of pop culture. Stu, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
First off, I have to commend you on this amazing book. It was just a trip down memory lane for me, and there's a lot of things that I had no idea about, and so you did the research for me to find out, and I appreciate that. Just look at that cover. I'm going to try to not get it with the light, but just amazing and thick and full of information on the hobby that we love, and I guess that's probably a pretty good place to jump off as a setup to the book. Can you just tell us, how did you get involved in the hobby in the first place?
Oh, the hobby in general.
Yeah.
That was...
And I know it's in the book. You talk about a bit of your history, but just to set it up, how did you get to that point where you would be able to write a book like this? And how did you get in the hobby?
Yeah, it was like a lifetime of interest that has kind of just naturally culminated. I wanted to learn more about D&D as a kid. Wasn't really allowed to. Kind of conned my grandparents into buying me stuff that my parents weren't approving of. And fueled, I think, mostly by the art and the idea of monsters. I just got into Dungeons and Dragons, and then from there, a whole world opened up, and having existed in the analog years when, without the internet, I was only limited to what was in the bookstores near me. So about 10, 15 years ago, I started looking stuff up on eBay and seeing all these other role-playing game products that it was like the art and design, the visual stuff that really hooked me first. And I started buying stuff on eBay in large quantities. And I needed to justify that somehow. So I wrote a book and started first I started the Instagram feed, then we did the podcast, and now there's a book, all of which is really just an elaborate way of justifying my obscene eBay purchases.
So this is just a big tax write-off for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no passion here. This is just... Could you imagine?
The scam is out. Okay, we're going to end the interview now. But it's... throughout the history, and I mean, reflecting upon my own journey as I was reading your book, I started off with basic red box D&D, and that's how I got my foothold in. And I as I mentioned, I'm kind of way up here in Canada, and not a huge population base at the time. I was living in a small town, and I remember I went to a convention for my very first convention into Spokane, which is across the border in the States. And that was the first time I was exposed to other games besides Dungeons and Dragons. And that really spoke to me because, I mean, I love D&D, don't get me wrong, but the little weird oddball games, which I kind of grew to love, and they'd have these auctions and that kind of stuff. And there's games that I had never heard of, and I saw them and I was like, wow, that's so cool. And did you have that same experience of like, and you live in New Jersey, or were you in New Jersey as a youth as well?
Yep. Grew up here.
And so you probably had perhaps better access because, in that area, maybe more players, more stores. But did you have that moment yourself where you found different games other than D&D?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if back in the day you were still really limited by the pitfalls of just, analog distribution. So it really comes down to like what was available in the stores, and that was, maybe it was more than Calgary, but it was not like Fields of role-playing games. Just I remember I didn't see a RuneQuest product until 10, 15 years ago. Call of Cthulhu was here, but like just RuneQuest never showed up in the stores. So it was there was still sort of ghostly hands, deciding what was in front of me. But that said, I was exposed to other games other than D&D pretty early. I couldn't really figure out D&D as a kid. I had the red box and I played the solo, but like I was also in fourth grade, so like I think that like I was a little too young for it, and it was really baffling. And I also didn't really have anybody to play with, only child. And it took a little while before I found classmates who were who had older brothers who played, and then we started to put it together. But it was Marvel Superheroes, the TSR Marvel Superheroes game that was really, I think, and the thing that helped, like we figured out how to play using that game, and I think that is sort of what set me on this path of enthusiasm for games outside of D&D, because I didn't actually learn how to play initially with D&D, so it didn't entirely get its teeth into me. Although D&D is by far one of the it's that and Call of Cthulhu in terms of the games I've played most. But the wider world of role playing games is just so, like I love D&D but it's just so much weirder out there than D&D. And D&D is a weird game, especially when you get into a lot of its design quirks and like its monsters and its lore. Like there's deep strangeness there, but the wider hobby is even stranger, and it's so gratifying when people sort of make that first step into like just the vast variety of strangeness and different experiences that are available. Like it you can see people's brains explode.
And so you started like collecting and all the deliveries coming from eBay and the winning auctions and that kind of thing. And you then, as you mentioned, you started the Vintage RPG Instagram page, and you started posting and giving a little bit of history on it. And that really resonated with a lot of people. And I suppose, like timing wise, what year did that Instagram start approximately?
I think it was April of 2017.
And that probably coincided with the 5e and the growth and explosion, and Stranger Things and that kind of stuff. Did you know that you would be on that crest of or nostalgia of people getting back into the game, of watching Stranger Things and going, boy, I forgot how much I love D&D?
Yeah, no, absolutely did not. I think in my head, I thought that all of it was still fairly underground. Like even like Stranger Things, I think debuted in 2016, and even that still felt novel at that time. I didn't think that people were interested in Dungeons and Dragons because of that show. I thought that they were interested in like the 80s generally, or I felt that the nostalgia was much broader than that. And then I feel like I started the Instagram right as 5e was really cresting into its really big popularity, and then of course I like I said, like it was D&D's cool, and it's the anchor for the Instagram certainly, but I kind of delight in putting stuff that isn't D&D on that feed, so that people are constantly like, how do you find this stuff? How does this stuff exist? There's just a disbelief, and it's been 2017. That's 7 years now. But like 7 years of like surprise and disbelief is a at steady intervals is maybe my favorite thing about the Instagram.
Well, I do love the fact that you like share things with me that I've never found or never learned of before, and then I'm like, I didn't even know that existed, and then it forces me to kind of like dig a little bit deeper. And then essentially what you've done is taken all that information and put it into the book. And so what was the genesis of the book itself? Like how did that process happen?
So I always kind of felt like the Instagram was like a mapping of something, note taking, but without like any kind of formal idea behind it. I was just like, this will all be useful at some point. It was the idea. And then Ed Park, who a writer and editor whose book just came out, Same Bed, Different Dreams, fantastic novel. He hit me up a couple of years ago, I guess it was 2020, and he was just like, you should write a book. He's like, I love your feed. You should write a book. I was like, yeah, get out of here. That's no, nobody's going to buy this book. And he's just like, no, let's get you an agent and see. And then the agent tried, but couldn't get, because it wasn't D&D focused enough. The big publishers sort of passed on it. But I wound up kind of just writing the book anyway. I invested the time in the pitch, and it sort of, everything kind of crystallized. And then one of my Call of Cthulhu players is at MIT Press, and he's just like, I want your book. So, okay. And there we go. There's a book.
And for like, I have a lot of aspiring game designers and people that want to publish their own books and that kind of thing. Getting an agent and pitching to publishers and that kind of thing. What's that process kind of look like? Because it's probably different, like strictly like tabletop role playing game publishing, and then like mass book publishing.
Yeah. Getting an agent was cool, and it was really nice to have somebody in my corner in a way that I've never had before. I've always been Unwinnable is an independent publication. I tend to do everything on my own, and the DIY spirit that is from role playing games, I've really internalized that in my working life. So it was really nice to have. Even though it didn't, ultimately work out, it was really nice to have an agent. It kind of changed my mindset about what was possible and what I could do. Pitching publishers is like the worst thing in the world, and because you're putting a lot of energy into like trying to do yourself justice and your idea justice while also trying to find the ways it's marketable and to hook somebody, while also having to kind of acknowledge that they have a whole web of concerns that have nothing to do with you or your project or even book publishing specific. I don't know. It's a very strange business, and I'm because I'm so DIY. I think that I'm not like naturally like, what? Why are we doing it this way? Why can't we do this better?
Was it like you go in there with a pitch deck, like into a boardroom and go this and this, or at the time maybe it was Zoom meetings and that kind of thing? But
well, thankfully I didn't have to do anything. I wrote the pitch and we put together the pitch materials, and then Paul like brought it to people and showed it off, because I'm not a dog and pony show guy. And like that's another cool thing about an agent, is that if you have one, like they do all that stuff. That's great, because I think that a lot of writer folks and creative folks are just constitutionally incapable of doing that. I certainly am. Like it would the cost on my psyche would be too much. I wouldn't be able to write. I'd be too concerned about the anxieties of presenting. But yeah, it was just, and it's slow. DIY.
Yeah.
I am in control, and I can set the pace. So the idea of having to wait so long to do stuff is like, again, I just oil and water kind of thing. The great thing about working with MIT Press was that they were sort of like, when they picked up the book, they were like, well, this is going to be a 2024 book. I was like, no, this has to be a 2023 book. We have to get it out before the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons buries everything. And they were like, well, we can't really do that. And I was like, I can. So they kind of farmed out the production to me, and I delivered the book in a much shorter time frame than it would have happened if it was part of their larger production scheme. So that was really cool that they kind of gave me the ability to kind of move it along.
Wow. So, I mean, that's actually a feat unto itself, because did you source the printers and everything to that length?
we just did all of the actual production on the book. So the writing, editing, layout, art, the photography, and that was all done by me and my folks. They did the index and some of the cover specs, and they sourced printing and all the logistics side of it was MIT Press.
Okay, well, that's good, because I mean that's usually the pitfall of most designers, is they can get into the layout and the making it, but then once the printing and production and distribution, that's always a bit of a black hole for many folks, I would say.
Yeah, definitely a different set of skills.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as like how much editing and that kind of thing went on and how long did it take to kind of like put the original draft together?
The original draft took about 6 months, and then editing, the whole our production cycle, which included there was a line editor, copy editor, a a fact checker, and a sensitivity reader that all had to be reconciled with the text, and that took, with layout and Kyle's art and the photography, all took 3 months. So 9 months of production to get the book from word one to delivering the final manuscript, basically.
And when did you use the Instagram post as a jumping off point? Like, did you have all those digitally and then you eventually like kind of put them into sequence?
I do. I think at some point, all of the stuff that was already written as an Instagram post was part of the like a working list or a working manuscript, and then I'm sure that if you did like keyword, like phrase searches in the book, if you had a digital copy of the book versus like certain entries in the Instagram, you would find sentences that were carried over from the Instagram. But for the most part, it was a guide rather than like a scaffolding. So almost everything was rewritten and expanded upon. But it definitely was like the starting point, and it helped me. It helped me get like the list that I had everything. I had a hutch on my desk at the time, and it would have the books that I was writing about in chronological order. To kind of also the whole book was written in chronological order too, in terms of the product's chronology, and the Instagram definitely helped kind of arrange that and figure out what was important and what like. I could only really fit like 280 words in an Instagram post, and a big guide for what got into the book was what products and games merited more than that 280 words. So yeah, the Instagram was a big tool in sort of arranging the whole thing.
And sorry, I'm probably delving too much into like how the sausage was made, and
No,
I find it fascinating. And the other question I had was like you took pictures of the covers of many of the books, and did you have to get permission from the publishers or anything, or is that kind of fair use?
My position's always been that it's fair use. That was actually a sticking point for some of the publishers that we pitched to. The publishers are just sort of scared, I think, of that. The reason that there is no interior art is partly because of space, partly because that would have been more of an issue in terms of needing permission, which I'm sure I could have gotten, but like again, like it's a big book, and there just wasn't room as much as I would have liked for a particular group of entries. I think would have benefited from having interior art. I could have gotten it, but we just didn't have the space. And the words seemed more important. But no, I think that rightly MIT Press agreed with me that because these were objects, literal like commercial products that I owned physically, were in my presence. And these are photographs that I am taking of them. I'm not reproducing files. That this was a satisfaction of fair use, and also like nobody's. Why would you take it? The covers themselves, I understand why you would maybe take umbrage at the reproduction of an interior image, especially like a map or something that could be used in play as sort of violating copyright and lowering your ability to sell the product. But the covers are designed as public-facing advertisements for your products. And I don't think that you could really successfully argue that me reproducing them in the context of this celebratory book was, a violation of your rights. I think.
And obviously, for the most part, a lot of the posts or the pieces in the book were positive reflections of the product. So it's not like you critique somebody and they're like, guess what, I'm going to give a frivolous lawsuit and shut you down. the entire book is shut down because of one misspelled word or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and like that I am critical when I feel the need to be, but I think that it comes from a place of love in all the instances. I mean, in the introduction, I talk about why certain things aren't in the book, and it's literally just I don't want to write about them. I don't want to spend my time writing about stuff that I think is crummy or exploitative or horrible. So yeah, we do focus more on the positive of the book, and I think that it's a celebration. These are. It would stink if I put together this book and was, pointing signs to like check out all of these games that aren't D&D, but man, look at how crummy they are.
Yeah,
that wouldn't serve our purpose because they're not. They're great. They're
and how much did you pull? How much research did you have to do to fill in some of the gaps that you might not have known off the top of your head of it, maybe products that you had that you went, I better delve a little bit deeper? And how much research did you do for some of them compared to more obvious ones like Call of Cthulhu that maybe you had better knowledge of, but maybe some of the products that you were I didn't actually know that about that. Were there surprises?
Oh, there's tons of surprises. Everything about this, the whole vintage RPG experience is based on a steady amount of surprises. There's always something weird or new or bizarre to find, and that was true with the book. It's been true in the wake of the book. I found so many more odd games since then. I can't even tell you the last one because there's been so many. No, the research though is interesting. I'm not an academic at all, and I'm not or scholarly. I'm a college dropout, which my wife thinks is hilarious that I got published by MIT Press as a college dropout. I don't have any formal kind of research training, and I just kind of shoot from the hip really, and there was a ton of me learning more and more stuff, especially in this. It starts in the 70s and kind of through the 80s. It kind of goes like this, and then by the 90s, I basically what I was presenting was stuff that I knew. Largely, I think because I was a full human being by then. The 70s stuff was basically before my time, and the 80s I was a kid. But the 90s and on is lived experience, and you could see that I had to reach out to people to interview them for the 70s and 80s. And I think the only interview I did after the 80s is James Wallace in 99 for Baron Munchausen. And I just felt like I had a handle on it, and it just wasn't. I've been thinking about this in terms of Janelle Jacquet's passing, and I just reprinted the entirety of our interview. And her books, they were such singular, just she was all of Dark Tower and Caverns of Thracia. It made sense to just go directly to her and ask her, how'd you do this? Instead of me trying to figure out how she did that. And the need for that kind of everything became more communal as time went on because there's such a body of collaboration. Even though the whole thing is very do-it-yourself, like we are doing it ourselves as part of a distributed network of everybody doing it yourself. So there's a lot of tools. and I feel like everything became less singular, and I was able to comment on it more without having to do research. I have to say though that Shannon Appleklein's series of books, like foundational for my book. Like if he hadn't written those books, I would have had a much harder time writing my book. And I'm super in his debt for having written those.
And I should probably at this point mention I have an interview with Shannon about his books. I'll put the link up above. And for 3 years in a row, I've had Shannon join me for the year-end review. So I'll also put that link. And this last year we talked about the OGL fiasco and all the stuff that you could imagine. Yeah, what a mess. and maybe that brings us to my next question, which is the cutoff point. I mean, obviously on the title of the book, the subtitle is a guide to tabletop role-playing games from D&D to Mothership. So you're cut off at Mothership. Why did you choose Mothership as kind of like that endpoint?
Mothership sort of signifies my re-entry into sort of contemporary role-playing games. I came into vintage RPG as somebody who was sort of excavating the past and games that I had played, but Mothership was very much and the zines scene that it has sort of it didn't create the zine scene, but it definitely kind of like exploded it and popularized it. It led me into talking to and interfacing with people who are creating games now, like the scene as it is. So I felt like Mothership was really emblematic of where role-playing games are and are going. The formal cutoff of the book is 2020, just because that was like when I was writing it. So I tried to keep it as close to up to date as possible. And it's hilarious how much has happened since 2020. Cairn. How was Cairn not in my book? But it just wasn't out yet. There's just it's a cool hobby because it is constantly churning new. People are constantly making new things.
And then it leads to my next question of like the state of the hobby, of like now reflecting upon the whole history that you kind of put together and where it potentially could go. Do you have any kind of, if you were reading the tea leaves of like where are things going because of like reflecting upon the past, is there any kind of through line that you see happening?
I mean, I think that there's a gnat in here, which is weird because it's January. How does a gnat live in January? I think that there's clear patterns in how the industry has kind of worked over time, but I also kind of think that they're a little bit of a trap in terms of predicting what's going to happen next. I do think that there's an up and down that's very baked into this hobby, especially because it's so small, and I think that we collectively forget how small this hobby really is. D&D kind of changes the math, but if you remove D&D, very small, like not a lot of money, but a lot of enthused creators. I think that I don't know. I think that we're in for. I think that the market is naturally contracting, right? So in 2020, with the pandemic and everything, there was just an increased interest in role-playing games generally. Brought a lot of people in, but I think that a lot of that interest was faddish, and while it converted a lot of new people, I think that people also went on their way once the pandemic ended. I think that that's worse for D&D than it is for the broader role-playing game industry, especially how diverse that industry has become. There's just so many different people playing so many different games. I think that I think that I'm hoping that we see a leveling of the scales, a balancing of the scales, and we see D&D taking up less of the oxygen and all of these other fabulous games getting more attention. I certainly think that there's the potential for that to happen. Whether or not a bunch of DIY folks can actively and separately counteract like huge corporate forces. Who knows? But it's a weird world. Stranger
Well,
things happen.
it's interesting. It seems I don't want to call them ankle biters, but it kind of feels like there's a lot of people that are trying to compete with D&D right now and like kind of dethrone them, and it's almost a collective effort. And that's why I say ankle biters, but by no means are they ankle biters, because they're like in our industry or in the hobby, they're big.
Yeah.
Like Matt Colville and that kind of things. But there's like a lot of people. They're all taking their little chops at the big tree trunks of D&D right now. So we'll see if 6E or whatever they're going to call it is going to be a flop, and these other ones kind of are there to fill the vacuum like Pathfinder did. So interesting times, I would say.
Yeah, and I feel like the D&D likes are sort of obfuscating the larger industry. Like everybody sort of focuses on like the ankle biters, as you call them, Pathfinder and even the OSR as it's all still D&D, and I think that there is a chance for the non D&D games to sort of blossom into a fuller kind of experience. I Call of Cthulhu is always in the conversation as one of the larger, more prevalent role playing games. But as soon as everybody starts talking about D&D, it's just D&D stuff. And I like Vampire the Masquerade. I'm not sure where their current game is, but like in the 90s, like that was a really big, completely different sort of game. And I think that the way that a lot of the ultralight games like Cairn, even though it is still essentially a D&D stripped to the bone, I feel like there's pathways for us to find new modes of play that could be competitive with on large scales. We'll see.
And maybe reflecting upon, you had a lot of different games other than D&D, but a lot of them were fantasy based, and the genre is kind of maybe the thing that really drives it. How come? Do you have a kind of thought on why fantasy seems to be the go-to genre?
I don't. I agree with you. I did, and I think that for some reason it just works really well with the idea, the framework of role playing games, and it always has. It took a long time for there not to be a fantasy game. Even Bunnies and Burrows is essentially D&D with rabbits. It's not like the Warren where you're trying to simulate maybe like a more naturalistic bunny experience.
If we're gonna have to quote that more, a more naturalistic bunny experience. That's the tagline on the book.
There you go. I think that it's sort of it probably is a self-reinforcing thing. D&D is fantasy, so fantasy is role-playing games, kind of just like a I don't want to say a vicious cycle, but like a self-reinforcing system. Especially, I do believe that D&D has really stewarded or heavily influenced the visual language of fantasy in the broader sort of population. Like I think that folks outside of role playing games who like fantasy are primed to like D&D, because D&D has just sort of dominated like the way that I don't think that a lot of people have read Dragonlance novels. As much as like Game of Thrones is a crossover book, right? But that Larry Elmore aesthetic in the 80s really changed the way fantasy in general presented itself, and I think that has sort of become like a tentpole of the genre, and that feeds back in. So when people think, oh, I want to play fantasy, role playing game, like they think that's the way to do it. And I think that there's something self-reinforcing about all that. I don't know why though. Because and Traveler and Star Wars and Call of Cthulhu, like they're not fantasy and they work just as well. But there's something about dungeons too, and I think that dungeons are sort of the singular thing that kind of came out of D&D. Like not, I mean, yeah, it's in the name, but this idea of the constrained space where you have lots of options, but you only ever have like 2 or 3 of them in front of you at a given time. I think that that play loop, the way that presents play, is naturally kind of aesthetically tied to fantasy. Well, like it doesn't vibrate the same way when you put it in a starship, as much as I'd like it to, or an office building or similar. Like the dungeon, there's something about it that like it speaks to like a mythological headspace that I think pulls role-playing games to fantasy in I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked a little bit prior to even setting up the recording, and I said, I really love the Ghostbusters section of the book, because Ghostbusters is like one of my favorite games. And shameless plug, Bugbusters is a game that I'm producing. It's like an homage, I suppose, in some respects, a spiritual, if I can say that, a successor of Ghostbusters type of thing, where but I find like when you start to get into the adventures, like in setting up the adventures, it gets difficult because you have to set it prior to cell phones or the internet, and like in modern times. And then like, so there's so many like escape clauses, like, well, we'll just call the police, we'll just like, and do all those things. So it like makes it more difficult to kind of fine tune how the game works without the modern amenities, so to speak, of what a game is. And same with sci-fi, like, well, do you have faster than light travel? Do you have like wormholes? Do you have that kind of thing? And it starts to get complicated, whereas a dungeon and your world that you created doesn't have any political ramifications. It doesn't have like any of the stuff that we've got in like Call of Cthulhu or any of those types of things. It's just like a standalone, there it is, there's a dungeon, the loop that, as you say, you go in, you discover, and you might die, but that's part of the process. And
Right.
It seems to be like the easier way to play. And I think over time it just kind of builds up. That's at least my kind of take on it.
And it's so naturally constraining but interesting. Like you always want to know what's behind the next door or down the next passageway. And the fact that like that's just, I think that everything else about original Dungeons and Dragons is kind of like, it has become standard for so many role-playing games. But I think that the dungeon is the thing that really made Dungeons and Dragons the classic that it is. It's just it works so well, and it's so plastic, right? Like you can apply it to so many different situations. There's an infinity of dungeons, and that's just if you limit it to the fantasy style dungeon. Like once you start trying to port it into like the human mind or a business, an office building or a starship, like you can constantly try and map that to different experiences, and it will always be different, but always constrained in the same sort of ways. It's super weird, man. Like, how did they do that? How did they crack that code? Like,
yeah, well,
it's like a generational accomplishment.
Yeah, it's and when you think about the history of it and how, like, would it have been invented otherwise? Maybe not. And it impacted so many of us over the years, and like become like a foundational part of who we are as people, like in the hobby, that like it's just a way to connect with people. I know that I have been reflecting upon this, like just as I'm getting older, and I'm seeing, there's like perhaps an epidemic of lonely older men in the world, and they bond over like traditional things like sports, hunting, fishing, that type of thing. But you see it a lot of it in role-playing games too. It's a way to connect with people and build communities, and not just to limit it to men. But I can't help know that in the early days of D&D, that was a big population of that. So it's, a fantastic hobby. I love it. Right.
Yeah. No, and it's like, there's something about dungeons too that like there's a shared experience across all dungeons, right? Like they all work basically the same, so that we can always talk about a dungeon crawl using using its same language that's developed around it. So like there's just a commonality there. Like whereas like something like if I'm talking about my Masks of Nyarlathotep type game, like that, like you don't necessarily have points of reference for that, because it's just like, it's world travel, is it Indiana Jones, like there's a lot of stuff that's just variable there, whereas like holes in the ground, and the fact that like it's so, I'm reading Underland now by Robert McFarlane, and it's all about like exploring actual underground subterranean spaces of natural, human-made, whatever. They're awful. Like they're awful in completely different ways than the fictional fantasy dungeon is. That's another thing that kind of blows my mind.
When I see those like underground exploring in Paris, and I'm like, that's panic inducing to me when I see somebody get stuck.
Like, getting stuck is just the worst thing, and there's just really nothing in the game that correlates to that. Like I've never had a situation in a Dungeons and Dragons game where I was worried about players getting stuck. But it happens all the time in caving, and it's horrible.
Well, to switch gears a little bit here, let's talk about the Unwinnable media empire that you've built. And how did that start in conjunction with everything else that you've been doing?
Oh God. So this is terrible, but I started writing about video games. I was working at the New York Daily News, and there was space in their website at the time to kind of just sort of write stuff that you were passionate about. So I got it in my head that I could try and get the latest Grand Theft Auto, which I think was 4 at the time, as a review copy, and that I could write about it. It didn't work. They didn't send me one. But I did start writing about video games for the New York Daily News, and then from that I just sort of met other people who were writing about video games, and from that, because I have this DIY disease, I was just like, well, I'm going to start my own site, and I started the Unwinnable Web Site back in 2010, forever ago. That went really well. People were interested. It's because I wasn't really interested in just doing typical reviews. I'm interested in like creative nonfiction and sort of memoir and the different ways that play kind of interacts with our lives. It just reviews and previews and the regular video game journalism thing just didn't really appeal to me. But I thought that there were other modes of writing that would be interesting, and other people also thought that. So it was sort of a natural collaboration. And then in 2014, we kickstarted a digital magazine, and we kind of just went from there. It's all collaborative. It's all very low risk. Like it's a lot of memoir, and it's everything now. It's called Unwinnable, and we focus a lot on video games. But there's movies, TV. We talk about everything. There's Unwinnable Monthly, the website, and then Exploits is sort of like a cultural diary, recommendations and stuff.
I happened to stumble across the Exploits issue where you talked about Magnum PI versus Miami Vice, and I couldn't help. I'm reading this, and you had mentioned that you and your wife watched all Magnum episodes, like from the beginning to the end, and the difference between watching that and Miami Vice. But first of all, there's no way I could watch that many Magnum movies with my wife, because like she would never ever find me acceptable in any kind of frame. I just bad. Like it. I always say if we ever met Tom Selleck, I just go, okay, well, I guess I'll take my ring off and you have your hall pass or whatever you can do, because she loves Magnum, and but anyways, but the stories like that I find that fascinating when you look at the cultural critique of reflecting upon that time of Magnum versus Miami Vice and the difference between the two. And I love that kind of pop culture critique. And how do you come up with your topics? Like, is it just kind of your own experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I was so taken by the fact that like I watched Magnum when I was a kid, and when I over time I just sort of applied this, like, oh, it's like Miami Vice. He's a cool guy in a cool place, and like fast cars, bikinis, and whatever. And then so I was just like, in a fit of like, I want to, nostalgia, and I want to revisit this. I started watching it, and he's a doofus. He's like he's like a lost boy. Like, it's so not what lived in my head all those years. And it was so much better than I really was willing to give it credit for reflexively. Like it's a really interesting show about like a bunch of guys like doing their best. It just really appealed to me, and I was just like I needed to tell the world, like, wait, we need to reevaluate Magnum a little bit. He's not. It's different. And yeah, almost everything that I write about is just like something that I find that I think is interesting enough that merits sort of sharing. And like one of the things with the book is that like I was really, I don't know why I'm surprised by this, but was the amount of people who were just like, I read the introduction to your book, and it was just like, it felt so like it resonated so strongly with me. I was like, why? Like, that was my personal story, really. But there's universal stuff in there, and I think that when you're telling a personal story, you're also speaking to something larger naturally, and people try and find the commonalities. And I think that's sort of what I'm interested in with writing and storytelling, is finding those commonalities.
Well, as a latchkey kid and a pop culture enthusiast, everything you do kind of speaks to me as well. I never got into video games. I was, after Atari, I was like, okay, I'm moving on. I love all the content. And then just to kind of finish off, you and John Hambone McGuire, I've got an interview with John talking about Action 321 that he's made, and all the good subgenres and games that he's made from that. How did that podcast start? I know he's given you tons of credit for his initiation into the hobby.
He was just getting into, he like just sort of got into the idea of podcasts, and he was just like, Stu, let's do a podcast. And I was just like, I don't want to talk. Nobody wants to hear me rattle on. Like, I write. That's my thing. My brand is typed words, not spoken words. But he was just like, no, come on, let's try it and like see how it is. And then we sat down and tried. I think we recorded the first episode, the pilot episode, like 4 or 5 times. And I was just like, this is just never going to work. But then like that 6th time, whatever the last time was, it was just like everything clicked. We stopped sort of like being like totally aware of what we were doing. And we just like had a conversation about stuff. And it was really fun. And I think that as much as I was just like, I don't want to talk to people about this stuff, so I didn't. And I've all of the podcast episodes are either me talking to Hambone and sort of explaining these weird things that I found so that he can like benefit from it, and similar to how I write, or I'm just talking to myself about them and working through my ideas in a way that would help me convey them. Like, a lot of the book comes out of the way, like, me rattling on about, I got 15, 20 minutes I gotta fill, I gotta, about RuneQuest, like, quick, what's interesting, and how do I make this interesting, and thinking on my feet about these things. It helps me to write, I think, in a way that allows reading them to be entertaining and edifying, and not like stereo instructions.
Well, it's a great podcast. I look forward to getting it every week, and it's definitely, if you're not subscribed to it on any of the platforms, make sure you check it out. That's Vintage RPG Podcast, and I'll put all the links in the show notes in the description, so you can check it out. And as we come to the end here, what's next? Are you going to do another book in the future, from Mothership until who knows?
I would love to do another book of similar size and scope, Now that I've dealt with like what I think of is mostly important for Dungeons and Dragons, and like just focus on all of the more oddball stuff, I could definitely fill another book that size. Would it be as interesting without D&D? But it's worth a shot. But if I do something like that, it would be a little bit down the line. The next thing I have going on in hopefully spring of next year, I'll have a book called Down, Down, Down coming out through Strange Attractor, which is a look at dungeons. It basically, the idea sort of builds off the appendix in Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground about dungeons, and how there's no real corollary to the fantasy dungeon in our world or in our fiction and mythology before Dungeons and Dragons. The dungeon of Dungeons and Dragons is unique, but I try and go back to subterranean sources, and kind of pull quotes from them. So like Beowulf and Paradise Lost, Dante, right up to George MacDonald, Tolkien, Moria, anything that seemed like, oh, this seems informative of the dungeon as I understand it now, and tried to collect quotes to kind of paint that picture. And after D&D, and then right up until 2020, I pull from role-playing games too, in hopes of trying to paint a picture of like what this psychological, because it's like it's a brain space, right? It isn't a physical space. It's this weird mental place that we inhabit and explore, trying to get a fix on that. So it's a collection of quotes, and then it's followed by commentary on all of the sources. And I don't know, it's a weird ass book, but it was really fun to write, and I think people will be into it, hopefully.
Cool. And you think it's going to be out next year? Is that what you said?
Hopefully spring, definitely fall of 2025.
Cool. Well, we look forward to that. And when it's complete, please come back on the show and share with us all your findings. And I'm sure it's going to be just as interesting as Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground. And where can people get the book?
They can find bookstores worldwide. If they don't have it, you can ask them to order it, and they should be able to get it. If not, you can get it directly from MIT Press's site. Don't forget that there is a regular edition and a deluxe edition in a slipcase that is really handsome as well. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll have all those links in the show notes in the description. And Stu, I just want to say thanks for coming on the show. Awesome book. Love it. Love your podcast. You're doing incredible work. And just want to say on behalf of probably a lot of people that walk down memory lane reading the book, thank you.
It will never cease to bowl me over that A, that the book exists, and B, that people like, I mean, it's nice that they like it, but that it seems to speak to something like deep inside the people who have chosen this hobby, and like it's just like it's overwhelming. It's really nice to hear it, and thanks for having me on.
Well, it's been my pleasure to have you on, so thank you.